started. Thank you. There's so many of you, which is lovely to see. I'm imagining you're all very much looking forward to some of the updates that we have for you. I'll just do an intro first. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Joe Delarose. I'm the LISC Massachusetts Program Officer for Green Homes Programs. LISC Massachusetts, as some of you might know, is one of the 38 local LISC offices across the country that leverages the scale and expertise of one of the nation's largest CDFIs to support various local solutions that are critical to various communities. And in our Massachusetts office, we've been tackling some of the state's most pressing community development challenges, namely in this regard and empowering affordable housing organizations to fully participate in our state's efforts to decarbonize its building sector. And so it's in that vein that we're here today, trying to help provide you all an update on some of the more pressing and timely solar updates. So we're really happy to be able to have so many of you here again, and I will pass it off to our solar expert and friend, Isaac.
Great. Well, it is lovely to be on with you all, and as you will hear in the presentation, we do not have, it's not all bad news, which is, I guess, maybe my headline for today. Which is nice to be able to report that despite all that's going on, that we still have some good news to report. So with that, I will pull up the presentation and get started. So, as you all have seen in the news, there's been a lot of fun stuff going on at the federal government around solar tax policy and at the EPA, all of which have implications for folks who are planning solar projects. As a reminder, this presentation is going to focus on solar and its outlook specifically for multifamily affordable housing in Massachusetts, noting that many of these updates are applicable if we have stakeholders outside of that who are interested in learning about this. So let's get started. So first, I like to start with the bad news first, and then we can get to the brighter spots at the end of the presentation, which will, always good to get the tough stuff out of the way early. So the toughest stuff really has to do with all the funding coming out of the EPA. And I'll provide an update on where we are with that, obviously with Lee Zeldin at the helm, and the various termination letters and all the things going on. In general, the sort of the rule is that if any dollar needs to be given out as an actual check or a grant by the federal government, that is sort of programmatic, as the greenhouse gas funds are, that those are more subject to risk, and that if projects fall under tax credits, they are often able to fly under the radar and still find means of proceeding. So we will kind of proceed through it, and then we're also going to learn about SMART 3.0, which is the state's new smart investment program for projects that provides a cash incentive in Massachusetts over 20 years. So we will close with that, and that is the bright spot where the state is really noting that this program was planned well in advance and happens to be rolling out at a time and in such a way that is going to provide a really important kind of offset to some of the loss of federal incentive for these projects. As a reminder, I think many of the folks on this call have already interacted with Resonant, as we have been running this program with LISC for the last 5 years, since 2020. But Resonant as the technical assistance provider that is supporting solar exploration as part of the STAR program with LISC and with others. And as a reminder, we are an employee-owned organization. We're based in downtown Boston. We're serving projects in Mass and New York. We are actually just at the early stages, as an aside, of starting to explore projects in Connecticut. So if developers have projects in Connecticut they are interested in looking at, that is something that we are happy to separately look at and think about with you from this program. Our focus is on affordable multifamily housing, nonprofit, small commercial buildings. Probably about 70% of our work is with multifamily affordable housing. And what makes us different is that over these last 5 years, we've really dove in and specialized in figuring out a bunch of kind of custom services and supports to try to make solar easier for multifamily affordable housing, which ranges from lender and investor consent, helping you get all the approvals from various stakeholders in a project, figuring out all the ways to maximize your tax credit and federal incentives, and generally navigate the choppy waters of the policy landscape to maximize dollars for these projects. Since the beginning of the program, we've analyzed over 2,500 sites, and we have planned solar projects now. There's about 12 megawatts of projects that are now underway across the state of Massachusetts for STAR participants, and there's about 3.3 megawatts that have already been installed. Affordable housing solar projects have as we like to say, have a long planning and development process where there's a lot of paperwork and approvals and things that need to be navigated. And then the irony is that most projects are completed and installed within as short as 2 weeks and as long as 4 weeks. So these are, mostly rooftop systems that go up very quickly, but require a lot of thoughtful planning to get up there. And that is our main work that we like supporting. With that, I'm going to dive into the policy, and I will move through this fairly quickly with the goal of, since we have a lot of folks on here that I imagine might have specific questions, want to leave lots of time at the end to dive into those, and note that we will make more time separate from this call to work with folks individually if there are key things that we can help with. First, solar policy. So this is, apologies if this is coming through a little grainy, but we will update that in the final presentation. But this is just a quick reminder. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was a piece of the puzzle of the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in 2022. These programs kind of got off the ground in 23 and 24 and started to select awardees of the $27 billion that fell into these three large buckets known as NCIF, CCIA, and Solar for All. And as a reminder, NCIF and CCIA, which are about 14 billion and 6 billion each, those were more focused on national level deployment, and were related to kind of helping to get loans and investments and more opportunity going for solar. CCIA had a big focus on grants and the Justice 40 initiative and other things. And noting that NCIF and CCIA went beyond just the scope of solar and were also looking at other forms of decarbonization and electrification and things like that, while Solar for All was specifically targeted towards solar and low-income communities, and was broadly considered a very exciting progressive win in this program that Bernie and many others back during the drafting were very excited about. And of that $7 billion, as we'll talk about, Massachusetts was one of the recipients, and then there were other multi-state recipients who would have directed some of their dollars into Massachusetts as well out of that program. In terms of its current status, so on July 4th, H.R. 1, otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I never like to call it that, included language that said that it was they were going to rescind all unobligated funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And I think at the time, Republicans had touted this as yet another sort of challenge point that they had put up in the face of a program that was passed by the prior administration that the current Republicans that control Congress and the White House do not like. However, after this bill was passed, the Congressional Budget Office indicated that only $19 million of the $27 billion was actually legally considered unobligated. And as you will watch this play out, the term unobligated turns out to be kind of like the whole legal thing that is happening with these funds. And unobligated typically means that funds are obligated if they have been signed, and that under our kind of current laws, the recipients of that funding have legal rights to that, and that funding is a liability for the federal government. And we are now, in both cases, we now have two different court proceedings where there are now legal challenges. Because what's interesting is that the One Big Beautiful Bill, by rescinding all unobligated funds, did not actually pause most of the funding because most of it was obligated. So in addition to pausing the funds, the EPA issued notices of termination. It did that first in March 11th to the NCIF and CCIA folks. And then on August 8th, most recently, for Solar for All. So that is the current status. Right now for NCIF and CCIA, we can kind of use that as a predecessor, and it's a little beyond my pay grade, but I will say that there are slight differences between Solar for All and NCIF because they have different awardees. Solar for All is predominantly going to the states, whereas NCIF and CCIA are predominantly going to nonprofits that are kind of multi-state stakeholders. So you have slightly different recipients, slightly different ways the funding was going out the door, of whether in the case of NCIF and CCIA, funding was moved out of the federal government and into a Citibank control bank account to try to get those dollars out of federal control. Whereas Solar for All, that was not the case. That funding was retained at the EPA level and was going to be called upon by the recipients, including Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources and others, on a reimbursement basis as costs were incurred for those programs. So anyway, slight differences in exactly where the money is in the federal bureaucracy and state bureaucracy and how that's all working, but largely similar in terms of the idea of these funds having been legally obligated. And now, as of as of August of this year, NCIF and CCIA funds continue to remain frozen. A local court, I believe a court in New York, initially said that the case for the folks who are challenging the termination of NCIF and CCIA, that had merit, and they unfroze it. And then it was immediately challenged by the EPA and moved up to a DC district court, which then refroze the funds while the court case plays out. And so that is where we are with that $20 billion worth of funding. And then with the Solar for All $7 billion, we are kind of now at the ground floor. I think it was largely thought that Solar for All was going to potentially skip the hardship that is facing NCIF and CCIA, largely on the grounds that we thought the federal government might be reluctant to cancel a program that's benefiting, I believe, all 50 states in some fashion, and at least 40 plus states are individual recipients of funding out of that $7 billion. And that would make it somewhat less politically attractive for termination. However, that does not seem to have played out. And as of August 8th, we have now kind of begun the legal challenge there. So what's at stake for Massachusetts? Massachusetts Solar for All won $156 million, of which $20 million would have gone to private affordable housing and 15 to public. There would also have been $3 million in technical assistance as a budget for each of those programs. And I'll note that that's the information we have right now, and that program is still in the process of getting finalized and rolled out, and was not fully kind of out the door and available to apply for funding as of the date of this termination. There's a program website here, and you can check and see kind of current status on the program, noting that that program website has not been updated since this termination letter was released. And as far as we have gathered, the participants, which includes the Department of Energy Resources, Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, the Massachusetts Climate Bank, housed at Mass Housing, and let's see, a handful of other folks, I think also Boston Public Housing Authority. All these folks are, I think, as I understand it, not able to speak on the current status while it is under kind of legal challenge. And so we will hopefully hear more as soon as the state decides how it is planning to proceed with what we believe is very likely to be an unlawful termination of obligated funds as the general treatment of solar for all. So in general, this is a tough finding as of August 8th. Many of these organizations had already begun to hire to start to administer the Solar for All program. This is going to create uncertainty for those particular team members and for these organizations as they figure out how to proceed given the uncertainty around the program. And, you know, if I were a betting man, I'd say we've got at least 6 to 12 months of waiting to see how this all plays out from the legal side of things. But there is great uncertainty around it until we get more clarity at the kind of this higher, at least probably DC district court level, or even at the Supreme Court level as to the legality of these terminations. So in terms of next steps, we believe that attorneys general may sue the EPA based on this latest termination, and that will then trigger yet another kind of legal proceeding similar to what is already underway for CCIA and NCIF. And there are policy organizing opportunities. Clean Energy States Alliance is organizing and providing a lot of great resources. So if you are interested in joining the fight and the pushback, Hannah at CISA is a great opportunity or great contact to reach out to think about with. Let us see. In the meantime, we will likely continue to pursue technical assistance funding for the STAR program from Massachusetts Clean Energy Center using just state dollars, and that there will likely be, we are in the process right now of formulating what 2026 might look like, but I think in large part we will be seeking further technical assistance dollars to try to help organizations navigate all the various federal policy items going on right now. All right. So very quickly, we'll address tariffs, which you are all reading about and are likely wreaking havoc on any of your new construction affordable housing projects you're working on that are not past a certain magic moment in the procurement process. So the good news for solar is that thus far, we have not seen tariff impacts that are going to be really significant, especially for most rooftop solar projects in Massachusetts. Or even for parking canopies for that matter, because we were already using domestic steel anyway for the parking canopy. Most of the material cost amounts to around 30 to 40% of most of the projects that we're looking at. As a result, you know, a 10 or 15% increase on 30 to 40%. In general, we're looking at, you know, maybe 3 to 5% cost increase overall as the kind of potential implications of tariffs. And I will say that there are, as we'll get into, because of some of the other federal policy items that are going on around the tax credits and safe harbor, the market for solar equipment is going a little wild right now, specifically for panels, as very large developers are placing bulk orders for, you know, like $100 million at a time worth of panels, which is driving up demand. And so if anything, we think that a supply and demand factors separate from tariffs are likely to have potentially a larger cost implication than the actual tariff themselves. And so there's a lot going on the equipment front. We are working our best to navigate it with our customers as we work through it. And hopefully this gives you an order of magnitude for where tariffs may land relative to the rest of it. Moving on from tariffs, we're going to talk about those federal tax credit updates. Just as a reminder, if you are not already familiar with federal tax credits for solar, under the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022, this was the law of the land, which was that you could get up to 70% off your solar project, and that was a kind of all-in tax credit basis, meaning that would cover not only the cost of equipment, but also labor and planning and engineering and all the other good stuff. And also grid side modifications required as a result of solar. So pretty comprehensive in terms of what this tax credit would cover. There's a base tax credit of 30%. That's applicable to all projects. And then there were what we call adders, but adjusters on top of that, where you could get bonus tax credits if your project met certain criteria. The energy community, which we'll talk a little bit more about in this presentation, is, as we like to call it in our office, the Joe Manchin adder. This was written to very specifically benefit projects that are located in census tracts that are either near retired, coal-fired power plants and fossil fuel infrastructure, or are in census tracts that have a certain level of employment in the fossil fuel industry and a certain rate of unemployment at any given time. And that was to be reassessed on an annual basis. The irony, and the reason that we say that's the Joe Manchin adder is because that's written to basically make all of West Virginia an energy community, and many other parts of the country like Texas and other kind of areas that have lots of fossil fuel employment. As it turns out, Massachusetts, for whatever reason, as a surprise of all surprise, has been qualifying as an energy community because some of our counties have a sufficient rate of unemployment to qualify, and we seem to have enough employment in the fossil fuel industry, likely due to natural gas as kind of our main distribution and things like that, that seems to be making it work. So we'll show you the map, but actually much of Massachusetts is right now qualifying as an energy community. Domestic content, if your project meets domestic content requirements, which means typically somewhere between 40 and 50%, depending on the tax year and some of the exact details around the project. If the equipment is 40 to 50% coming from domestic sources, you can qualify for this extra 10% to your tax credit value. In general, we have been seeing that there's at least, a few percent cost increase to the overall cost of the project to meet domestic content for most projects. So you can think about it like, you might spend an extra 2 to 4% of total project cost in many cases to buy the domestic equipment, and then that is offset by a 10% overall cost tax credit increase, noting that you also have some extra paperwork and compliance things to figure out how to document that domestic content as part of your paperwork. In the case of energy community and domestic content, both of those are not competitive, meaning that you just either qualify or you don't based on your census tract and based on your equipment, and anyone is eligible for those. The next one is the low-income communities bonus tax credit. That is a 10 or a 20% tax credit. There are 4 different categories. The main categories that apply to multifamily housing are, you can also get the 10% tax credit for category 1 for any project that is in a qualifying low-income census tract, and you need to apply for it. And then within that credit, a lot of it is reserved for housing specifically. So you're very likely to get it if you have a project that is housing of any kind, whether market or affordable, in a low-income census tract. The other option is a Category 3 20% that is only for specifically federally subsidized affordable housing. That relates to, in our experience, that has been mostly low-income housing tax credits and project-based Section 8. And between those two categories, we have helped I think over 400 properties in Massachusetts over the last, what is it, 2 or 3? I think, yeah, we're on our third. We just finished our third cycle of applications. So it's very exciting. It's a great opportunity. And that gets you to that total of 70% that is potentially possible. For most projects, in the beginning of this, we were seeing that mostly a few years ago, domestic content was very difficult to get because there just wasn't enough domestic equipment being manufactured, and that energy community was fairly rare. Recently, energy communities become more common. We've had great success with the low-income bonus tax credit program, and an increasing number of projects are eligible for domestic content. So whereas in the beginning, we used to see 30, 40, 50% tax credits on many affordable housing projects we were working on, we're now seeing 50, 60, and in some cases, even 70%. I got to look at a Penrose project that we're looking at recently in Worcester, which happened to align with the whole trifecta here of adders. So exciting opportunities abound, and we'll talk more about that. And the general update here is that the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it was passed, did not change any of this. So the only thing, insofar as all of these rules are still in place, and the ability for nonprofits to claim, or tax-exempt entities to claim this tax credit, was also not changed by the most recent bill. So all of these rules are still in place, and the main thing that has been changed, because the federal government was most focused on trying to roll back larger scale solar projects, which stand to be the greatest threat to our existing kind of fossil fuel producers who played a significant role in providing funding to the current Republican majority in Congress and in the White House. They have been largely focused on larger scale solar projects. So that will be the theme as you hear through these federal incentives of what was under attack and how projects benefiting affordable housing have managed to dodge a lot of the worst of the rollbacks that we've seen at the federal government. So the key change was that instead of all of this being in place through 2032, which was the case under the Inflation Reduction Act at 10 years from that 2022 passage, now the tax credits, and I should also clarify that this 30% tax credit, just so you can hold in your mind, is associated with Section 48E, which is a technology neutral tax credit. That's that 30% base. And it's important to keep in mind because you may have been hearing that solar tax credits are ending by the end of this year. And that is only for residential tax credits. If you're a single family homeowner trying to buy solar, that is under Section 25D, a separate tax credit that happens to also be for solar and also be 30%. And that is gone if your project is not placed in service by the end of this year. But we will set aside residential. We're focused today just on commercial and multifamily, Section 48E. Under those rules, that tax credit will phase out by the end of 2027. So you have two different pathways here, and I'm seeing we just have a slight typo here. So I'll just fix that. So your two pathways for a solar project are to either safe harbor your tax credit by July 4, 2026, or to have your project placed in service by December 31, 2027. There's also another rule that was added, which regards foreign entity of concern provisions. This is often known as FEOC as the acronym for it. And this begins for projects that have not safe harbored or meaningfully gotten started prior to January 1, 2026. And as you can see on this list, China, Iran, and North Korea are the FEOCs in question. And we are not buying a whole lot of manufactured goods from Iran and North Korea. So China is really the only sort of notable entity on that list. And so what FIAC will create is a burden of proof for your project that at least a certain percentage of your equipment is not meaningfully coming from China. And the exact rules about how that's all going to work out are still TBD. So we'll talk more about that. In terms of policies that will remain in effect, this is the map that is showing you which counties are likely to qualify as an energy community. And as you can see, it's pretty much all of Western Mass, except for Hampshire County in there, which is kind of carved out in the middle. And then you have the Cape and Islands and Central Mass with Worcester County. And those are basically what you can see there is those are the counties where unemployment rates basically like ticked up just high enough in this particular year that they were able to make those counties qualify. So that's great news. It's worth noting that the energy community designation, this extra 10%, the way that you get it is either you place a project in service in the year when the county is eligible as an energy community, or you safe harbor it in a year where the county is eligible. But it's worth noting that that county can, many of these counties were listed in fiscal year 23. Then they were delisted in 24, presumably because employment rates went up between 23 and 24. And now, with whatever's going on in the economy, perhaps tariffs and other things, unemployment rates have gone back up enough to relist these counties again. So even if a county is listed in a given year, that could change in future years, and it's worth keeping that in mind. It's also worth noting that the federal government used to have staff that maintained a map that showed you very conveniently which was eligible, and they have fired all of those staff or directed what staff they have to not maintain that website. And so we are now linking to an energy community map provided by Baker Tilly, which is an experienced accounting firm who is keeping track of this. And as you can see, it says likely qualifies on the map because they are not the Department of Energy and are not the final source of information on this. And so they are giving their best guidance, but are not, this is not coming directly from the federal government, unfortunately. So there is that one caveat I will add to this whole piece, but they are, reading the tax law and the policy as it was originally passed, and providing an update as to which counties qualify based on that information. So as a summary, all of this is still in place. And then it's worth noting that a 30% tax credit for battery storage actually remains fully in place through 2032 and was unchanged by the Big Beautiful Bill. So a standalone battery storage project is still fully tax credit eligible and was not changed in its approach. So what does all this mean? We're about here, part of the way through July, part of the way through August in 2025. So there are, we're in the window of safe harbor, and a lot of folks are referring to this as the last call for solar tax credits, and that is about right, which is to say if you get projects started within the safe harbor window, you have 4 years to build that project after you safe harbor the project. And so this is a key window of time. And then most notably, if you safe harbor before the FIAC compliance starts in January, you also can avoid the FIAC compliance, which means that in general, we believe your project costs can be slightly lower, right? And we believe projects will still be buildable under FIAC, but may come with somewhat of a cost increase to, make sure that your supply chain on the project is somewhat more decoupled from China, who is a primary manufacturer of many electrical goods, solar panels, and other items. And as all of this is coming into place, more and more manufacturing capacity is coming online in the US for inverters, for panels, for racking, and is becoming more and more feasible to buy American, notably in some cases at a slightly higher cost than you might have had otherwise from outside the US. All right, foreign entity of concern. We're not going to go through this in detail, but this is just saying that the amount of stuff that needs to come from a non-China source it increases slightly as the year goes on. And you've got some math here to help provide that as a support. One important thing to note is if you have a solar project that includes batteries, that is what we are most concerned about as it relates to FIAC, because batteries really, the supply chain is extremely not in the US and is very China dependent. So any solar plus storage projects are looking kind of complicated in the near term. And that's worth thinking about. Any solar projects that are solar only, likely shouldn't be a problem, as we've noted, and good to proceed quickly if you can. So the question is, we've talked a lot about safe harbor as the way to lock in your tax credits, and the question is, how do you do that? So there are two tests for safe harbor. There is what's called the 5% test, which is paying a certain amount. And then there is the physical work test, which is actually literally starting construction in some way. And this is the policy that was just updated as of last Friday, so 3 days ago. And the 5 to 10%, the 5% test was left in place for all projects under 1.5 megawatts AC. And I have yet to encounter a single affordable housing development that can host a system that is larger than that. So what that means is basically the federal government said, we're going to leave the existing safe harbor rules in place for projects under a certain size. All multifamily housing is fine, is the short version. And so this policy was a big rollback, and will cause major problems for larger scale community solar and utility scale solar developers. But basically, the news is that there is no meaningful impact, which we are very relieved by, and we're not expecting, and thought it was going to be potentially much worse than this. So safe harbor. The reality for most affordable housing projects is that actually beginning physical work is quite complicated, right? You can't begin physical work in most cases until you get all of your approvals from lenders and investors, and often until you get building permits and things like that. And so the 5% test is for rooftop solar is the gold standard that is often used. If you make that payment a minimum of 5%, we recommend up to 10% in case there are cost increases later in the project. If you make only a 5% test, that means you are basically budget capping your project later, and you cannot increase the dollar amount. Whereas if you make an 8 or 10% deposit up front, you have lots of room to have the budget move around later on you on the project and not have any problems, because you will still be exceeding the 5% of the ultimate and final cost of the system when you go to file for your taxes. Let's see. So as a reminder, July 4, 2026 is the final safe harbor timeline for this project. For federal tax credits overall. And we are encouraging everyone to do it by December 31 of this year that can, to get out ahead of the FIAC compliance requirements. Just a quick snapshot of who has already done this. We have many folks on the call, I think right now, who have already done this, but homeowners, I'll highlight Will Munson, I think just joined. Homeowners Rehab Inc. We just are working on their 4th phase of solar. So they're kind of getting up into 50 or 60 projects that they've installed in Cambridge. This most recent phase was all of the solar projects we had previously disqualified because their roofs at the time when we first looked at them 5 years ago weren't ready to be replaced. And so we kind of put them all in a we'll get to those later bucket. And with this new policy and the 4-year timeline, HRI decided that they wanted to lock in that federal tax credit and basically put a plan in place for when they would replace the roofs for these ultimate, this next batch of projects they want to look at over the next 4 years. And so we help them get contracts in place and put safe harbor payments in place for I think, another 20 sites that they're looking at right now. But IBA, just to start, Harbor Light, Housing Corp of Arlington, Metro West, and Worcester Common Ground, all are folks who in the last 6 weeks have made a minimum of 5, in most cases 10% payments towards their projects to get that safe harbored. And we were encouraging folks over the last few weeks to try to, if projects were already kind of in process, to try to safe harbor them on an accelerated timeline, out of concern that this most recent policy update that came out on Friday we thought might be more concerning. And as it turned out, we dodged that bullet, and that there is actually was not time pressure, as it turned out. And now the real time pressure is the end of the year in advance of FIAC as the sort of our next big hurdle for safe harbor. So that's the federal landscape. We've got this incredible opportunity over the next year to try to lock down as much of these federal subsidies through safe harbor as a very time-bound and sensitive, time-sensitive opportunity. Now, separate from that, and it's worth noting, getting 70% off is just going to make any financial pro forma look awesome. There's no doubt about that. And the reality is there will be a world for solar even without federal subsidy, which is hard to imagine because 30 to 70% is a lot. But as it turns out, we also have other really significant enabling factors. Apologies for that. We had a truck rolling through the neighborhood. I don't know if that's coming through. So what are those factors? So Massachusetts is rolling out a new program called SMART 3.0. The Massachusetts SMART program, for those who are not familiar with it, was first launched in 2018. It has gone through one revision, and which is why we are now referring to this as SMART 3.0, as this is kind of the third evolution of it. The program pays out based on system size, either 10 or 20 years of cash incentive payments that are made on a monthly basis by the utility provider, which would be in most cases National Grid or Eversource. Those smart incentive payments typically work for most behind-the-meter rooftop systems, which is most affordable housing, where you lock in a rate up front, and then that rate gets applied to whatever your production is in a given month, and then you get cut a check. And usually that's an ACH automatic payment that gets put into a checking account that we identify for the property at the beginning of it. So in terms of some changes between the previous SMART program and this one, the short version is that we, with LISC and with others, and some on this call who have supported the policy advocacy, have been really successful in getting the program to reorient towards low-income participation, and that includes multifamily housing. So this program is awesome for multifamily housing, is the short version. Small projects, which are under 25 kilowatts AC, are going to lock in a affordable housing boost. So they get double the market rate incentive, which is 3 cents. So they will get 6 cents. And I'll actually update this. At our request, we believe they are going to update it. So even the small affordable housing projects actually get 20 years worth of incentive. That is still pending, but we believe that's how it's going to work. The Massachusetts market overall has been rebalanced. So while incentives have been high in Eversource East, which is basically the Cape and Islands and the greater Boston area, incentives had dropped really significantly in the western 2/3 of the state of Massachusetts. And so there has been a significant rebalancing, and we've seen just unbelievably dramatic incentive increases for projects out in that western 2/3 of the state. So, Worcester, Springfield, Pittsfield, all of these areas are seeing really significantly higher incentives under the SMART program. Parking canopies have a significant new adder, and there has been a big focus on trying to drive more adoption. We are, for the first time now, seeing solar for parking canopies look economically attractive, and seeing folks reconsider that after years of not considering it. It's worth noting that parking canopies still have a really significant additional upfront cost, and the SMART program provides high additional subsidy for those parking canopies, but it's paid out over time. So there is still this kind of upfront sticker uh, shock at times item to deal with parking canopy solar projects. But if you can get your arms around the upfront cost, usually with loans or with financing and grants, there is really significant revenue to help justify that higher upfront cost now under this program. And then lastly, there is a rooftop raised racking adder, and that is the final rules on that are still getting finalized over the next month or two, but we believe that there will start to be an adder. So whereas in the old program, there was no real incentive to do anything other than the kind of standard flat roof racking systems that don't really get much off the surface of a flat roof, there are now a little bit more incentive to help justify the extra engineering and upfront cost required to get a racking system to go up above, gas lines, vents, other obstacles on a flat roof, and even to go for a much higher raised racking to get up over 3 to 5 foot tall HVAC or mechanicals or other things on the roof. Noting that getting up 1 to 2 or 3 feet off the surface of the roof is not wildly expensive and fairly easy to do. Getting up 5 to 7, maybe 10 feet off the surface of the roof to get over HVAC is a pretty significant cost increase, and we're not so sure that the rooftop racking adder is going to financially justify that specific type of project. But at the very least, getting up over lower lying obstacles like gas lines, electric lines, and vents and things like that, we think there's going to be a good case for that. Emergency draft regulations were filed in June 2025. We expect final regulations to come in October. Applications are open October 15, 2025. There's going to be a 10 business day period where all applications get in. They're going to be prioritized based on interconnection service agreement. So there is every reason to get started on projects early to get those ISAs and kind of that's the permit approval with the utilities in place earlier so that you get to the front of the line with this program. And then notably, you'll see low-income properties that began construction after July 1, 2024 are eligible. So what this means is that we were successful in advocating for a much broader definition of projects that previously might have been thinking about getting into the prior SMART program and getting much lower incentives. We were successful in saying, if those projects are not already turned on, as long as they began construction after July 1 of last year, that they can now get into this they can cancel their SMART 2.0 allocation and get into this new program. So there is a great economic value to be had here for projects that are not already turned on, but were in some way in the works. And we have had, I think many folks on this call have had projects that have benefited from this. So we're excited about that. In terms of just an order of magnitude, this gives you an example of how one specific project we were looking at worked, but where they had a $29,000 over 25 years for this 100 kilowatt project. We are now seeing that same project generate $191,000 over 20 years in cash incentive under the new SMART program, which is in this particular case, over 20 years amounting to almost half of the total upfront cost. And this is an incentive as a reminder that in addition to the electricity costs, and electricity costs have skyrocketed since the pandemic. When we started Resonant, mostly we were looking at all-in electricity costs in the kind of like 15 to 17 cent range. And 9 years later, the company is just celebrating its 9-year anniversary. We're at almost double that, where we're looking at 25 to 30 cent electricity costs in Massachusetts. In the top 5 states in the country, right? Massachusetts is up there with peers like Hawaii, which is an island where you have to ship diesel and then burn it to turn create most of the electricity on the island. And somehow Massachusetts, with all of our grid congestion, older infrastructure, and other challenges, has electricity costs that are up and approaching that. So great reasons to install solar with those electricity rising costs to shelter you from that. Great reasons with this new smart incentive program to add significant additional value. And I think what I'll close with is just to say that the headline right now is the sun is still shining. The sun will continue to shine, and this market will continue to move forward, and we believe that decarbonization is not stopping even as we have this change in the federal government. The current incentive landscape is even better now than it was in the last Trump administration. Resonant started doing this work in 2016, and we were working in a much lower incentive environment, both at the federal and state level, and electricity costs were much lower then. So you can think about it as like there's a time-bound opportunity for the next 11 months to be able to stack all of the kind of the tail end of the federal tax benefits that came out of the Biden administration and the Inflation Reduction Act before those go away. But that's the cherry on top of what is now a really robust Massachusetts Smart Incentive Program and electricity value. That is, continuing to go up. So there's going to be a strong economic case going into the future for solar in Massachusetts. Prices will go up a little with tariffs, and not enough to, halt our progress. And that in general, if you can move quickly towards safe harbor, that is the number one most important item. And with that, I want to move to Q&A. Happy to answer any questions. This was a lot of info to cover. Actually, I remembered there's one other thing about the SMART program that I forgot to mention. So I just will say that the SMART program, the incentives that we are modeling and guiding folks with are based on the 2025 numbers. The program administrators, which is primarily Department of Energy Resources, has built in an annual renewal program. So incentives are applied for in a given year. Incentives can now run out. However, there's a really big carve out for affordable housing that we don't believe will be exceeded in any given year right now. So we believe that there's going to be general protection, but it is competitive and first come, first serve for the incentives. It runs on a calendar year. So the first program is going to run October 15 to the end of 25, and then there's going to be a new annual program starting January 1 and 26. And those incentives are going to slightly change and may slightly change in any given year. And the Department of Energy reserves the right to, in a targeted way, change those incentives. With that, last disclaimer to put in your mind, happy to start. It looks like Cindy has a raised hand, or Joe, if you want to facilitate.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. This was really informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk through this. I'm wondering if, I'm new to LISC and to Resonant Energy. I help a small nonprofit. I don't, I'm basically sort of freelancing, trying to help them with solar. Is there a way, but because of what's happened at the federal level, and with direct pay, is it possible that Resonant and LISC will help like small nonprofits, affordable housing nonprofits, to sort of kind of walk them through this process? They've been trying to put solar. They own like some single families, they own some, two families and three families, and then they own units in larger multifamilies. I guess I'm trying to figure out if you might help, and we can take it offline if need be.
We're happy to be in touch and provide some general guidance. In general, Resonant typically doesn't work as much in the single family sector. And we do have some separate grant programs that we're doing technical assistance for Habitat for Humanity affiliates, which might be a sort of a closer proxy to the sort of building size and type and what's going on there. So we'd be very happy to provide some general guidance. And depending on the building size, we may not directly be a provider for those projects, but are more than happy to help you step through and make recommendations on how to support those.
Great. I've taken down your email information. And what about housing authorities, like in the different municipalities?
So housing authorities, we're also happy to provide guidance. We're in this latest round of the STAR program. We supported 5 housing authorities, primarily in gateway cities, in exploring solar feasibility, and are still working through the process this fall right now of providing them with some guidance on pathways. And the short answer there is that we can provide some guidance, and one of the main challenges that public entities face in doing solar is that they need to step through the processes for public procurement. Some groups, like we have representatives from Cambridge Housing Authority, have chosen to put out their own RFP and to select a vendor for going through that, which is the slightly more paperwork route for doing solar, and that there are ways around that by working with another group called Power Options, which has a special designation in Massachusetts general law that allows them to do an advanced procurement on behalf of public entities. And so they have a setup that can create a more streamlined pathway that is often going to be a good fit for doing a no-cost solar pay-as-you-go kind of financing called a power purchase agreement for housing authorities interested in exploring solar. All that's to say, we're happy to provide more information, but that's kind of a quick rundown.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay. Seeing none. All right. Thank you again, Isaac. I think that was, everybody will agree that that was extremely helpful and extremely comprehensive. So as we just mentioned in the chat, we have been recording this, so we'll make it available on our website, on LISC's website, and I'm guessing maybe through Resonance as well. So yeah, if any other questions come up, please feel free to reach out to Isaac and or I. Yeah, hope that this was helpful.
Thanks, everyone.